Good morning, folks. You are very welcome to this week's episode of Genos Live. And particularly delighted this week because we're talking about the next generation of EI to have with us the founder and CEO of Genos International, who have been here for the last generation of emotional intelligence. We're going to bring, you can see Ben waiting patiently in the wings there above. We're going to bring him in a moment. And you see Elaine as well waiting, whom you'll know at this stage is looks after us and keeps us on the straight and narrow and looks after your questions and so on. Before we bring Ben in a very, very few short minutes, let me just make a few announcements and do a quick introduction. First thing is, you'll notice that we're not coming from our usual studio environment because you remember last time, if you were on, that we got a little bit of a blip and we lost some of you. So the techies are working on that right now. So we're streaming this straight out of Zoom for now. Now, just on the off chance that the gremlins are still in the internet, let me give you a backup. Elaine is going to pop in a link to our live stream page. And what I suggest to you is that in a separate tab that you open that up so that if something goes wrong with LinkedIn, because what we found out is LinkedIn is not very robust. When things go wrong with the internet, it doesn't recover well. If something goes well or goes wrong, all you need to do is hop across onto that and you can continue the session without any kerfuffling. Indeed, if you want to hop across onto it right now, you can do that. So you're very, very welcome. This is one of the topics that's got in fact, in this season, it is the topic that has got the most of you really excited. We have, when we came on live, with 397 people had signed up for it, and it was clicking up a little bit all the time. So it's obviously a very, very hot topic. Now, as ever, we're going to start with just asking you to engage with us a little bit in the chat, and Elaine will be watching that. I'm not watching it right now. And tell us, and let's impress Ben, where are you dialing in from? Because I know we always have this very, very multinational audience, and let's just look at where are these 397 people coming from. And then just out of curiosity and just to start off, maybe you pop something in telling us who's the most emotionally intelligent person you've ever met, and why do you say that? So, if you feel inclined to share that into the chat, pop it in there, and I'll come back to that in a couple of moments. Now, I'm not going to do the traditional sort of introduction to Genos that I do on a regular basis. Instead, I'm going to ask you the question. Do you know anybody that when they walk into a room, they suck the energy and the positivity out of it? Now, I can't see you, but I've done this in front of so many groups and so many hundreds of people, and I ask for a show of hands, and I know all the hands go up, and you're all looking at somebody in your mind's eye. You're thinking, I know exactly who you're talking about. And I think everybody does. So let me ask you the counter of that question. Do you know anybody who makes the room a warmer, better, more pleasant place to be just by joining it? And again, I can visualize and I can see all of your hands going up. Well, what that is and what that effect is something that Darwin spoke about, back in the 1800s. It's emotional intelligence. The reality is that the emotion that we bring into the room and the behaviors that we bring into the room have a tremendous effect on the people around us. And it's really important in the context of trying to engage people and get the best of them, because what we know from the social sciences research is that the way you show up really has an enormous impact on the way people feel. The way they feel has a big impact on the extent to which they engage. And Ben has a phrase I often hear him use. He says, the most robust finding in the social sciences is that positive, productive emotions are directly linked to positive outcomes for organizations. So the way people feel determines the extent to which they can engage. And that determines pretty much everything else. And that for me is almost a working definition of emotional intelligence, understanding that the way you show up is really tremendously important. And that's what Genos International is all about. We are solely focused upon emotional intelligence and those other important aspects that are impacted by emotional intelligence. But we're really about how do you or your clients make the people that you interact with feel. And we do that by providing a world-class suite of emotional intelligence assessments, which have 20 plus years of research behind them. Online emotional intelligence programs, psychological safety programs, resilience programs, and so on. We also certify independent emotional intelligence practitioners to deliver what we create. So you can become certified as an emotional intelligence practitioner. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. We must be good at what we do, because for the last 5 years, we've been one of trainingindustry.com's top 20 assessment companies in the world. And fingers crossed, the jury is out literally this month. We'll hear if we made it for the 6th time. We are coming to the end of 2022. And as we come to the end of the year, and most people start to find, particularly in the middle of December, that their business is slowing down a little bit, this is the ideal time to get skilled up. We're doing an extra certification program because we had so much demand for one that would work over the holiday period, not during the holiday period, but would work from the middle of December, early December, to the end of January. So bottom line, if you join that program, you could be a certified emotional intelligence practitioner before the 1st of February. So it's a real opportunity to, if you're an independent coach, consultant, or trainer, to add an entirely new business line to what you do. And if you're an in-house coach, consultant, trainer, or L&D professional, to bring the benefits of emotional intelligence to your organization. You can see the QR code on the screen, but also Elaine is going to pop in that email address that you see down below. If you're interested in joining that program, if you quote when you join up, if you quote Genos Live, we'll give you a 20% discount on this last program of the year. So that's the general introduction. Elaine, let me pull you in for a moment. And Ben, apologies for keeping you waiting. We'll have you up there in just 2 minutes. So let me just bring Elaine in there and ask you, Elaine, what are people telling us? Where they're dialing in from, and what's the most emotional intelligent person, etc.?
Yeah, good morning, Derek. So we have people from all over today. We have Ireland, Macedonia, Australia, India, a huge contingent from Malaysia, Botswana, Stockholm, Finland, Nairobi, and the list goes on. They're really tuning in from all over the world today. So we have a few comments. We have Alexandra says, yes, definitely. I have a coworker who brings bright in the office when she joins, as she transmits a positive attitude, laughs, and makes you feel at ease. So I thought that was a really nice comment. And whoever that colleague is, what a fantastic rating.
What an accolade. What an accolade indeed. Yeah.
But the comments are hopping. We have a lot of people tuned in. It's very early in our part of the world, so it's great to see they're getting up and at it early.
Great, super. Thank you for that. Well, then, let us, with no further ado, let's bring Ben into the equation. I'm just going to spotlight you there, Ben, and I'll de-spotlight myself and just let Elaine just do a formal introduction. I know from the comments in the LinkedIn event that a lot of people are joining because they know who Ben is, but I dare say that there are some people who don't. So let's give them the formal. Who is Ben Palmer?
So welcome, Ben. Dr. Ben Palmer is CEO of Genos International. He is a highly respected and widely published researcher and authority on observational emotional intelligence. Ben completed a PhD at Swinburne University, Melbourne, developing the first Australian model and assessment of emotional intelligence designed specifically for workplace applications. In 2002, Ben founded Genos International, a global organization providing emotional intelligence assessment, consulting, and development to clients in just about every country worldwide via a network of more than 7,500 certified EI practitioners. Welcome, Ben.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Elaine, and you're very welcome, Ben. Good, Greg. Great to have you here at last.
It is, and I would like to say a good morning, a good afternoon, or given we've got some Australians with us, a good evening as well to everyone who's out there joining us. And the other thing I wanted to say to the question, who's the most emotionally intelligent person you've ever met? I think I've met a lot of very emotionally intelligent people, but I have to share something that I came across recently, a film called Cha-Cha Real Smooth. It's an American comedy drama. It's a 2022 film written and produced and directed by Cooper Raiff, R-A-I-F-F. The plot centers on a 22-year-old college graduate who starts making money as a party starter And while he also strikes up a relationship with a 32-year-old mother, it is a fantastic film. And if there's one thing for sure, Cooper Raiff can certainly act what emotional intelligence looks like behaviorally.
Oh, we'll be watching out for that one for sure. I'm a real film fan. I haven't even heard of that at all. Great. Thank you for that. So Elaine is going to disappear to the background. She's going to be watching your questions. As soon as, if you have any questions while we're talking to Ben, pop them into the chat, and periodically we'll open up, we'll bring Elaine in and pose them directly to Ben. This session is for you. We know we could talk for a couple of hours here, but we really want to address what you want to address. So when we started setting up for this, Ben, you said something to me, and it really knocked me back in my standing. You said we're into the 4th decade of emotional intelligence, and it seems so fresh and new, and it seems like only yesterday that I heard of it. I was stunned to put it in that perspective. What would you say, looking back over the last couple of decades of EI, what's the history been? What's really happened, and how has it developed?
Well, it is very interesting that we're in the 4th decade of it. It speaks a little bit to perhaps our age, Derek. But if I could perhaps just use headings to give you the history of emotional intelligence. The 1990s, I call that the decade of discovery. Lots of different models and measures came about following Daniel Goelman's book, Emotional Intelligence, Why It Matters More Than IQ. And indeed, I was a young PhD student at Swinburne University looking for a topic. My supervisor threw that book on the table and I read it and fell in love with the concept. So the decade of discovery, different models and measures, and that sort of culminated, I think, really with the classification of 3 major approaches to emotional intelligence. The ability approach, which looks at whether we have the actual underlying abilities to deal with emotions. The trait approach, which looks at sort of our preferences and preferable behaviors and how they fit with emotional intelligence. And of course, the competency or behavior approach that we really focused on, which looks at how you show up with emotional intelligence. The year 2000, the decade of the 2000s, or the noughties as they call it, I think that was really the decade of research. As you can imagine, the 90s created a lot of academic infighting about which approach was best. And, you know, some of that started to get settled with some research and applications. One of my favorite research studies from that decade looked at the heritability of emotional intelligence and found through a genetic study that only 10% of our emotional intelligence seems to be associated with our genes, that we really learn a lot of emotional intelligence through our life experiences and our upbringing. And I think that really speaks to the fact that it can be developed. And indeed, the latest meta-analytical research suggests that a good EI program can improve emotional intelligence by, on average, 17 percentile points. And I think that's a fairly outstanding and remarkable result. The year 2000s, I think that was really the decade of application. I think organizations and the late adopters, if you like, had really been convinced now by the research. And so we started to see organizations really applying it. Classic service profit chain plays, you know, let's be more human on the inside so that we're more human with our customers and drive better customer service and profitability, loyalty through that process. We saw organizations use it to improve engagement and therefore execute strategy more effectively. We saw emotional intelligence really used to help drive change in the early 2000s. And then if we move to this final decade, the decade perhaps that we're going to talk a lot about and most about tonight, the 2020s, I think we're going to see in this decade, obviously, the use of emotional intelligence as a vehicle to improve empathy, well-being, and hybrid ways of working. And we will see organizations like Genos move from really just a B2B company to a B2C, as you see the gig economy really starting to take off. Organizations, of course, like ours, DDI, Korn Ferry, the rest of them are really going to have to adopt a B2C model, I think, if they want to stay alive, given that a larger number of the workforce will start to enter into that more casual, contractual gig economy way of working.
Yeah. And when I first met you, which I think it was, would you believe it was 2014? I think the end of 2014. So it's actually flown by. And I remember coming back really, really excited, and we set out to take Europe by storm and went out knocking doors. And at that time, just a short 7, 8 years ago, when you spoke to senior executives, particularly people maybe with my color hair, and you mentioned emotions in the same breath as you mentioned business, you sometimes had to work hard to get them on board. But the last 5 or 6 years, suddenly it's arrived, and we have those same people actually reaching out to us looking for guidance on emotional intelligence. What has happened in the last 5 or 6 years that EI has arrived so comprehensively, do you think?
I think there are two main drivers of that. The first driver that was really starting to make a push for emotional intelligence pre-COVID was artificial intelligence, machine-led learning. What we saw and what the commentary was about was that machines were going to take over more and more of the thinking aspects of jobs. And indeed, that has proven to be true and will continue to be so. And so what was happening at that time is organizations were saying and seeing the need for more generalist people skills, that this was going to be the new IQ, if you like, of the future. People who were good at social persuasion, people who could really drive change, people who could influence, people who could drive good customer service and relationships in organizations where the thinking aspects of jobs is being taken over by machines, the people aspects of jobs become more prized. And indeed, Capgemini, the consulting firm, did a research study that was released just in 2019 before COVID. And their prediction was that the need for emotional intelligence and the demand for it would increase sixfold over the next 3 years. Now, they didn't know that COVID was around the corner, which of course was the next big driver. If anything, as Josh Bernstein really talks about a lot, the famous human resources commentator Josh Bernstein from the US, it really turned organizations' attention, I think, to the fact that leaders don't just need to lead a team, they need to improve the well-being of a team, keep the wheels of business in motion, and really help people flourish at work. And not only that, I think help people understand the meaning and purpose of their work, and to make work meaningful and purposeful for people. The big resignation and the tight labor market, the chatter about that may have dropped off a little bit, but I think organizations are still in the thick of now again racing to employee retention and employee engagement and employee attraction. And so that need for a workplace that is a positive organizational climate where I turn up and I feel valued, cared for, consulted, informed, understood. I feel like I'm doing meaningful work. I think that more than ever is a real strategic advantage and a strategic lever for organizations at the moment, particularly around talent attraction and talent retention. And this is on the minds of a lot of organizations, particularly those that are in a growth phase at the moment.
Yeah, and it's interesting to say, it's probably too soon to say, and I don't want people to bristle when I say so, but there were some benefits that came out of the really tough years of COVID, and that was one of them, that it brought that whole thing to the fore. Interestingly, we had Paul J. Zak, the trust hormone guy, and the guy who's just released the book on immersion, on here a couple of weeks ago. And when I spoke to him about quiet quitting and spoke to him about the Great Resignation, he kind of swept them off. He said people talk about those like they're movements, people movements. They are purely and simply a failure of leadership. He said the problem is that leaders have not hopped on what people are actually looking for. And that's pretty much what you're saying. The whole scene has changed. And if you're not changing with it, well, then you are going to experience part of that trend that was being labeled as the Great Resignation and so on. So when you came, I mean, you were a young guy, as you say, looking for a PhD topic, and it would have been around the year 2000 or thereabouts. Things were really, really early in EI. I mean, it really was the kind of gold rush years, if you like, that people were setting out for this brand new territory. What did you want to bring to the whole EI thing that you felt wasn't there? What was it that you felt that would, give it a shot in the backside?
I didn't know it at the time, so you could say that this was a little bit of luck. And yes, I think a little bit of luck is involved in things sometimes. But I looked at a lot of the existing models and measures of emotional intelligence in the late 1990s and saw that none of them had really been developed specifically for organizational applications.
Okay.
So I set out to design something that was really specifically designed for organizations, two versions, something that could be used in selection and something that could be used in employee development. And I did put a lot of focus on the development instrument in particular. Why I say there was a bit of luck in that, one of the things I've learned over the 20 years of doing this that has really been validated and talked about a lot more recently by people like Lisa Fieldman Barrett in her book, How Emotions Play, is that emotions are highly contextual.
Yeah.
That the context often defines the way we read the situation and feel about the situation. And what Lisa's really done is debunked a lot of the research and commentary around the work of people like Paul Ekman and others who are into that sort of facial recognition stuff, that really context is king. And so developing something that was specifically for the workplace, well, the workplace is a particular context that I think has its own emotional culture, that has its own emotional way of being and doing. And so to design something that was specifically for workplace applications, I think where we looked at not only whether you demonstrated emotionally intelligent behavior, but emotionally intelligent workplace behavior, emotionally intelligent leadership behavior. That was a little bit of luck. If you think about it, Lisa's field of research and things around her weren't around in the 1990s, but I kind of saw that opportunity. And I think as we look into the future, I think other models and measures of emotional intelligence need to bring context into their assessments in order for them to be really effective.
Right. And tell me, so just to put that in context, because as you talk about that, it all lights up on my brain because we've had a lot of conversations around it. But if you went back to the late 90s and you were going into a workplace and you were using some of the existing tools to try and develop EI, what would the difference in the experience be? I mean, what would you be measuring, and why did you at that time feel, oh, this is just not going to work?
Well, there was the ability approach, and the most famous measure there was the mesquite. And I think that has a series of faces that you look at and sort of determine what emotions expressed in them, a series of landscapes and photos and things like that for emotional perception. And I think really that if you think about different cultural backgrounds and ways of being, that's where that sort of approach tends to fall over a little bit, because the context defines how you read the emotion. Then you had Reuven Bar-On's instrument, the Bar-On EQI. Sure, valid and reliable instrument, but really Reuven's a clinical psychologist, and you see his background and his training in his approach. Very big assessment, lots of information, 15 factors in the model. Great for an organizational psychologist with depth of training. Not so good as a model for accessibility, memorability, and ease of understanding in a workplace, by way of example. And so I set out to develop something that was, more easily memorable, more accessible, and focused on behaviors. What I didn't do in the early days, which I did more in the mid sort of 2010s, was a big adjustment where I tried to bring again the context into the assessment and context into the report. So a lot of assessments of emotional intelligence still to this day, including my own, look at how well you demonstrate a set of behaviors in comparison to others.
Okay. Or
like an IQ test, look at how you perform on the test, compare it to a benchmark, and give you a score. And ours does do that. When the GFC hit back in 2008, which was really the stimulus for this big development, again, where I wanted to bring the context more in, I would have people say to me in big Titan organizations, oh, the research might say emotional intelligence is important, and sure, that might be my score in comparison to a benchmark, but you don't understand what it's like in here right now. It's a bloodbath, or it's this, or it's that. What people were really saying, I think, was understand my context. And so the small adjustment that we made that really brings the context into the assessment was to ask people who are filling out the survey for you. So if I was a leader and I had, 10 direct reports and so on, some peers, is to ask them not only how well do I demonstrate the behaviors, but how important is it to them personally that I demonstrate the behaviors. And what our reports reflect is, in your context, as it is right now with your people, this is how important it is for them that you demonstrate AI, and this is how well you're demonstrating it. And we provide that contrast, if you like, between importance and demonstration. And that really brings a lot of conversation around the context that a person finds them in, by way of example. Sorry, I hope that was very long.
No, that's spot on. And so really effectively what you're doing, and tell me if I'm putting words in your mouth and the wrong words, effectively what you're doing is you're saying to people, hey, what are your of a leader? What are your expectations of this leader? How do you need them to show up to engage you? And hey, how are they doing against that?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's in the importance ratings sometimes are more fascinating than the demonstration scores themselves. I'll tell a little story about the chief executive officer of a big mining company in the world, one of the biggest mining companies in the world, went through the instrument recently and going through their results with them. And one of the things that we noticed is the executive team of this big mining company, who are all, $3-4 million base salary plus executives in and of themselves, were rating some of the behaviors as not very important.
Right.
Behaviors like one of ours that measures how well a leader demonstrates awareness of others. The behavior adjusts their style so that it fits well with others. This particular CEO had given that a 5 out of 5. In other words, it's highly important to me that I adjust my behavior so that it fits well with others. The executive team had rated it 2.9. So only important some of the time. And I said to this particular chief executive officer, did you see that contrast between how important you rated it and how well your direct reports rated it? And that person went on to say to me, oh, that really resonates with me. I've got a great data point that I can take back to this team and talk with them about it, not in a policing kind of way, but just in a real cathartic kind of way. When I go to a mining site, I put on, more casual clothes. I whip off the tie, I put on some boots. I know some of my executives, when they go to a mining site, turn up in a pinstripe suit and a Mercedes S-Class. And this particular executive went on to say, if I go and see the Prime Minister of the country in which this company is headquartered, of course, I'll put on an appropriate attire and appropriate demeanour for that particular setting. What he's really talking about is situational leadership, which is what that item underpins. And so putting the importance ratings in there, particularly for people leaders, gives them not only insight into their direct reports' expectations, but also their direct reports' mindset around some of these behaviours. If they don't believe it's important to demonstrate it, you can be pretty sure they won't be focused on it very much.
Exactly. Now, I'll bring Elaine in a second because there's obviously some questions popping up. But there was just, while you were talking there, it suddenly popped into my head a piece of research that yourself and James had done back around the time of the meltdown in 2009, 2010. And I hope you remember it, but it was, broadly speaking, what it said was that when we show up to people in the way that they want us to show up to them, they engage more readily and they become more productive. Now, it was more technical than that, but do you recall the particular piece of research?
Yes, I do. In fact, it's an article that we have published, and I can't remember the exact title of it now, but we could circulate it to people afterwards. What we found was when leaders met people's expectations, 4 kind of outcomes happened as a consequence of that. Firstly, people reported that this was a great place to work. So they were more likely to, in other words, promote the organization to the market. They were more likely to put in discretionary effort. We asked them basically to rate a series of sort of value creating behaviors and looked at the relationship between those two. They were more likely to stay and persist in the face of adversity, which was important in 2009 and 10, which is still important today, obviously, discretionary effort. But they were more likely not only to do their job, but try and improve what they do. So in other words, what was happening is when leaders demonstrated levels of EI that people were asking of them, they demonstrated more engaged employee engagement type behaviors, promoting the place as a great place to work, saying I'm not really likely to leave and I'm happy to persist in the face of adversity. I'm going above and beyond what's expected of me, and I'm not only doing my job, but trying to improve what I do every day. And I think that speaks value. It speaks immensely to what emotionally intelligent leaders really do, which is help people feel valued, cared for, consulted, informed, understood. That when people feel like that, those are the kind of outcomes that happen as a consequence. Strategy gets executed more effectively, change gets going and happens more effectively, but people also feel less stressed and more well at work, which of course is really still on the minds of a lot of organizations at the moment.
So it really, really is critical, and perhaps particularly critical in tough times like this, to have that context and to have that situational awareness and to be asking people, what do you want of me? So yeah, very, very timely. Let me bring Elaine in, and there we go. And I'm just going to slip back there a little bit. We obviously have some questions for Ben, Elaine.
We do. So we have Tina was one of our first questions in. So she says, hello. Oh, I'm sorry. Where's it gone to? She's after moving down my page. She says, hello, Ben and Derek. Glad to see such an underrated topic like EI being given some due diligence. Finally, we're discussing it. I'm specifically interested to understand if such a skill can only come inbuilt or can be taught and developed. Can we really upskill people on EI? If yes, how much time would it take for an average individual to really start self-building it?
Well, that goes to the core, Ben.
Great question. Yeah. Great question, Tina. As I was saying before, the latest meta-analytical research, so that's the research of the research studies, if you like, suggests that a good EI program that is longitudinal in nature, that is a number of sessions where people are learning content, applying it on the job, learning content, applying it on the job, can improve emotional intelligence over a 6-month period of around 17 percentile points. But you can test yourself in terms of your emotional intelligence and whether you can develop it or not. This is a simple test that I sometimes give people to do. 60 seconds to try and recall as many feelings you can recall feeling over the last 24 hours. Do that every night, Tina, for the next 30 nights. Email me, ben.palmer@Genos International. Tina, tell me the number you get on the first go, and tell me the number you get at night number 30, where you take 1 minute for yourself to reflect on the number of feelings you can recall feeling over a 24-hour period. I've done that myself. When I first did it, in a 60-second period, I got 5 emotions, and suddenly dawned on me why I did a PhD in emotional intelligence. And then at the end of 30 days, I was getting like 15, 16. But what was really going on, of course, Tina, is I was developing up my emotional self-awareness and my emotional vocabulary. And anyone who'd like to do that little exercise, women on average get 8 emotions in the first 60 seconds at the first go, and men get 8 and women get around 12. So there's a bit of a benchmark for you. Thank you very much, Elaine.
Great. We have Regil then said as well, what is the main differences between emotional intelligence versus emotional quotients?
Yes, those two terms get very confused sometimes, and sometimes used synonymously. Emotional intelligence really refers to the construct itself, that is, the capacity to perceive and understand emotions in oneself and others, to effectively regulate them within yourself, express them, reason with them, and to positively influence the way others feel. So emotional intelligence really refers to what the concept is. An emotional quotient, which is something that MHS with the Byron EQI and then the EQI 2.0 really made famous, is a little bit more analogous to IQ. It's a score with a mean of 100 and a standard deviation kind of around it. So your emotional quotient, in other words, refers to the level of it that you have. So emotional intelligence, what is the concept? Emotional quotient, how much of it have you got? I personally don't like the term EQ. I don't like that comparison, if you like, between IQ and EQ and quotents. I like emotional intelligence scores. I like understanding how well I'm demonstrating it, what my level of emotional intelligence is, but I don't necessarily quite like that term emotional quotient. Thank you.
Great. Colm then had a comment. Emotions are in part a response to the context, but people self-generate emotions and in fact bring emotions into contexts like work and it is nothing to do with the work context. So that was his comment.
That's absolutely true too. And I think that's one of the lovely, rich and depth paradoxes of emotional intelligence. So what I was referring to with context before was, if you look at an emotion on a face, you'll see one thing. If I put a picture behind that face and show you the same emotion, you might see something completely different, because the context within which you look at it plays a large role in how you interpret and understand the emotion. And that's really what the work of Lisa Feldman Barrett has done. But of course, in the workplace and many other contexts, some people have, a marriage buster, or at home, a difficult child. And it's hard not to bring the emotions of that to work. And that disrupts the context. Absolutely. It's the lovely sort of infinite contribution of both those things. Indeed, I called the tagline of our business game-changing for business and life-changing for people. And Tina, this comes back to your question in some ways. When you develop someone's ability to perceive and understand their own emotions and the role those emotions play in decisions, behavior, and performance, when you help someone be more empathetic, when you help someone manage their emotions more effectively and not be a John McEnroe on the proverbial workplace tennis court, when you help someone be a little bit more like Cooper Raiff in the film Cha-Cha's Real Smooth, when you're doing that in a workplace program, you're not just helping a leader better connect, communicate, and collaborate at work. You're also helping a leader or whoever go home and do that more effectively. So improving EI in one context helps you also demonstrate it in other contexts. And I'm in this world and in this business for two reasons, and in this order. The first reason, which is about this big, is because it makes a difference to people's lives at work, which is really important. But this bit is where they also say, oh yeah, the team's more engaged, but I'm getting along better with my 15-year-old, or, it's me and my partner are really doing better at home. That's where this kind of work really tickles me pink.
Yeah, great. Carrie says, pondering if you have fresh thinking on trauma-informed leadership, which is gaining prominence.
I haven't really spent a lot of time looking at that, no. But I do think generally that organizations are using EI, obviously for well-being purposes at the moment. And Kerry, one of my big passions with emotional intelligence is in those occupations that involve high levels of emotional labor and require high levels of emotional regulation, healthcare, aged care, certainly in the emergency services and things like that. I think that's where it really hits the road. I love doing work in education with school leaders, because I think sometimes what us as parents don't realize is a school leader could 1 minute be inspiring the performance of their team. They could be helping a student through a personal crisis. Yeah. Then they could be pivoting to dealing with a difficult parent like you or I. Then they could be helping their staff cope with increased stress and complexity in the classroom due to social and learning skill gaps associated with COVID absences and so on. It's very emotional work, lots of emotional pivots, and those kind of occupations and those kind of industries really, really benefit from emotional intelligence development.
Yeah. Just one for you, Derek, actually there. Kira would just like you to say the name of the book and the author you mentioned on trust again.
Oh, Paul J. Zak, or Paul J. Zak, Z-A-K in Americanese, and it's called The Trust Hormone, and it's really first-class piece of work based upon his research into oxytocin. And if you're going to read his book, you're going to read that book. It's really worth reading his latest one, which is called Immersion. That kind of takes that work on a little bit. So look back in the archives for Genos Live. He was here about 3-4 weeks ago. Really fascinating talk.
Okay. Another question for you, Ben. Ritesh says, what is the starting points or the lists of fields to focus on in teams?
In teams? Well, I'm not sure I fully understand the context of the question, but I think Obviously, emotional intelligence is a big thing for teams in the norming, forming and storming phases, I think, of team development. One of the things that we do with freshly formed teams is the emotional norms. How do we want to feel together? What are the sort of things we need to do with each other to experience those feelings? How don't we want to feel? What do we do when inevitably those feelings come up? That sort of forming and storming phase of team development from an emotions perspective is really, really important. Every team, as Derek, has an emotional culture. Yep. And forming that emotional culture and really getting people to articulate and define what they want it to be is a really big thing to do. Obviously, if you've got a very established team that's highly dysfunctional, there's low trust, there's not calling out each other's unwanted behaviors and things like that. Again, that same norming and storming phase needs to come back in where you get the team to say, well, okay, what's the current state? What's the future state we want to get to? And how are we going to bridge that gap from an emotions point of view? I'm conscious that we haven't talked much yet about.
I was about to say,
and I was just going to say,
for now. Yep.
We'll park them. Yeah, exactly. We have a good few coming in though for you, and a lovely few comments for you as well. And
let me tell you, folks, we will, because obviously there are more questions coming through than usual, and that's super. Keep them coming. What we'll do is we will let it run over for the recording, and those of you who have to run away, you can run away and you can catch it up on the recording. But we do want to get into what is the topic, and that is kind of next generation. So we've looked at what led up to this generation. So you're looking at the bleeding edge of EI and assessments all the time, because you're looking at where Genos is going to go in the next 20 years, Ben. Where's this all going to go? What are we going to see as the emerging future of EI assessment and development?
I think in the more distant future, we're going to see virtual reality come into both assessment and development, where you go into worlds and really, meet characters and interact with them, and from those interactions get good feedback on your emotional intelligence. I think that's that's sort of at the longer end. I think what we're going to see in the next 5 years is the harnessing more of technology and the merging of assessment and development into one. Right. So, for example, at the moment with our technology, you'd go and do an assessment, you'd have a report, it would be generated, and you'd either go through our digital platform where you'd look at that and have it interpreted to you, or you'd sit with a coach and have it interpreted to you. In the future, I think you'll go into a platform like ours, you will see the behaviors of emotional intelligence, and you will sit with your partner or your boss or some colleagues, and you'll choose a few behaviors that you'd like to improve within yourself. You'll see some development content that will help you improve on those behaviors. And the technology then will take you through some self-paced learning material around the development and demonstration of those behaviors. And I think that will be really built around a lot of the research of people like James Clear around habit formation, the power of aggregate marginal gains. So you really see, I think, technology being used to help people make 1% improvements, and to do those over time to experience the remarkable results that come up from the aggregate of those tiny changes. That's the first thing I think we'll see happen. The second thing we'll see happen is we'll see assessment and development platforms connect people. Right. So, I might be one of 100 people going through an emotional intelligence assessment and development experience. In the platform within which I'm looking at my results or doing my development, I might be able to see people in my group who are high in EI and have elected to be coaches or mentors. And I'll be able to use the application to reach out to them and say, hey, Derek, I noticed you elected to be a coach or a mentor. I'd really like to develop up some specific behaviors. Would you mind having a chat with me? So we'll see technology really adopt what I call the Wikipedia approach, the power of the crowd, really getting people involved in not only lifting their own emotional intelligence, but for those who are naturally gifted in this space, I think allowing them to step in and play more of that peer coach mentor role with the others in their organization and in their group. So I think we'll see platforms harness the power of the crowd. The other thing I think that we'll see is a lot of emotional intelligence instruments and models at the moment are, some of them are context specific, like our workplace instruments and leadership instruments. I think we'll see instruments become, when I say instruments, assessments and development experiences become more specific.
Yeah.
There's lots and lots of investment money at the moment being pumped into our understanding of discrete emotions or singular emotions. So, you know, we used to study emotions. Now people study anxiety. Now people study trust, as you've been talking about. Now people are deeply studying fear. People are deeply studying love. Barbara Fredrickson's new book, Love 2.0, is a fantastic read for anyone out there who might be interested in that. She draws upon the lovely Louis Armstrong's song, I see friends shaking hands saying, how do you do? They're really saying, I love you. And she talks about how a lot of those micro interactions that happen when we see the neighbor across the road are very similar to the feelings and the interactions that we have when we see a loved one in the house. So I think we'll see, you know, more specific assessments that help develop our understanding of specific emotions and how to develop them within ourselves. And finally, I think with the virtual reality, one of the things that it should be able to do is create emotional experiences. And I wanted to circle back to the 1990s, the first ever paper on emotional intelligence. The first academic paper on emotional intelligence by Peter Salovey and Jack Mayer. One of the things that they wrote about in their seminal article called Emotional Intelligence in this journal is they pondered and hypothesized that perhaps we develop our emotional intelligence through events that make us emotional. At school, that's playing sport on the field. It's the drama and the art class. For us as adults, it's, you know, sitting with our parents and flicking through old photo albums, or it's watching that thriller movie that gets you feeling a bit of anxiety, or it's perhaps that Cha-Cha Real Smooth film that I talked about before. You've got to watch it, everyone. Fantastic film. It will move you emotionally.
Yeah.
Where am I going with this? We've known for decades that one of the ways you can develop your emotional intelligence is to engage your emotional system, to intentionally engage in things that make you emotional. Derek, we'll ask you in a moment for your top thing. What do you love to do that makes you emotional? One of the things I love to do, obviously, is films. I love music as a way of moving me emotionally, but I also like the talent shows. America's Got Talent, Great Britain's Got Talent, the golden buzzer moments. I don't know why. There's something about achievement and seeing people have a go. It's not often just the performance. It's the story behind the individual on stage that really just makes me experience joy and the sort of tears and laughter that often come with that. And so I think virtual reality has the opportunity to move us emotionally and to teach us through that process how to better regulate and understand an emotion like fear, or an emotion like anxiety, or an emotion like excitement, what it's like to experience it in the body, what it's like to regulate that emotion, and how that emotion helps us think more broadly or think more deeply. How that emotion helps us really contemplate life itself, and how that emotion can really help us better connect with each other. We connect so much at an emotional level, but often at an unconscious or subconscious level. And I think that's what virtual reality has the opportunity to do, to develop up those really subconscious, if you like, emotional intelligence skills.
You speak with great clarity, Ben, around this idea of people going through an assessment that's very heavily integrated with the next step, which is leveraging the team that they work with, and then leveraging these sort of short, just-in-time education pieces. How much are you prepared to say about what you're actually working on right now?
Well, many of those things that I just talked about, and I know that it's not just us that are doing it, but heavily developing up at the moment a self-paced EI development experience that's built around the behaviors of EI, where you could sit down with your partner at home, with your 16-year-old or your boss at work, reflect on what emotional intelligence is and the behaviors of it, and choose together a behavior to work on. That's really where I'm going to really push Genos over the next few years, is into a development process where people sit down and connect, communicate, and collaborate more around the development of their own emotional intelligence. We'll be harnessing the power of the crowd. and we'll also be getting into that habit formation technology, so that, a platform that nudges you and reminds you to be emotionally intelligent, a platform that helps you define that 1% improvement action and integrate it more into your daily life, so that you view the assessment and the development of your emotional intelligence as a necessary part of your daily routine, like brushing your teeth, having a cup of coffee, or indeed putting on your seatbelt when you drive. You do all those habits because they make you feel something, right? Brushing your teeth makes your mouth feel more fresh. Having coffee makes you feel more alert. Putting your seatbelt on the car helps you feel more safe. This is one of the other instant kind of benefits that will come from adopting the power of marginal gains and or aggregate gains, and that habit formation technology that will be built into development platforms, including indeed our own.
Okay, and so we've spoken a little bit about the power, a lot about the past. We've spoken about the vision for the future. If for people who are watching now and are either coaches, consultants, trainers dealing with clients, or L&D people dealing with their internal audiences, how can they begin now to sort of tap into the future to get some benefit right now? What should people be thinking to do at this point in time?
I think people should be reading deeply, firstly. Barbara Fredrickson's book, Love 2.0, Lisa Fieldman Barrett's work, How Emotions Are Made. And I think we should also be combining that with the work of people like James Clear. Make sure that your coaching approach, your facilitation approach is really helping people get very specific about what they're going to do, how they're going to do it, when they're going to do it, what support they require, and so on. I think the other thing that we should talk about when it comes to the future is I think we will see a swing back to face-to-face coaching and face-to-face development. I think people are very thirsty to get together and connect. And so I think we'll see a little uptick from where we are today in those mediums, which is good. But I think in terms of engaging with this technology, many of the things that I'm talking about that will become evident in the platforms are things obviously that a good coach, consultant, facilitator can do today, if you know those sort of theories and those approaches that I mentioned before. And so, that's what we should be helping people reflect on: context, how they're showing up, behaviors that they want to improve over the next fortnight or the next month, and the things that they can do to get there, what they'll do, who they'll do it with, what support they need, when they'll need reminding, etc. We can, of course, do all that work with people in the background as coach, trainers, and consultants.
Okay, thank you, Ben. Now, we're not doing too bad on time. We have about 8 minutes left, and I'd love to get another question or two in from folks. But before I do, let me ask you: is there anything that I haven't asked you that I really should be asking you? Is there anything else that you really think people need to hear on this topic, EI, as we move forward into the future?
Well, I would probably just say that, the thing I love about it most is that the more you study it, the more you apply it, the more work you do with it, the more you realize that you are just at the tip of the iceberg. And I think the potential and the depth has still got a long way to go and a lot of room to run, if that makes sense. And so I'd say stay engaged and watch this space, because to be human is to be emotional. It's one of the most defining aspects of our humanity. And, it's still, I think, in comparison to some other areas, not very well understood. And I think there's lots and lots of opportunities for us to better understand our emotions and the role they play in how we connect, communicate, and collaborate with each other, and the role they play more broadly in our relationships, be it socially, romantically, or at work.
Great. Thank you, Ben. Thank you. So let me pull Elaine back in and just see. I know we had other questions flowing in there. Let me light you up a little bit and tell us just, let's take 2 or 3 minutes more questions.
Yeah. So we'll go to Angelo. So some are seeing emotional reasoning as a competence, which is very difficult to demonstrate in an economically volatile context when looking at high performance and within limited deadlines. What are your thoughts?
Very good question, Angelo. Thank you. I'm going to define what I mean by emotional reasoning first, just to go ground us in at least my response to that question. So emotional reasoning being the skill of consciously using emotional information from yourself and others, combining it with facts and figures to help you make decisions. The first thing I would say, Angelo, is that emotions can both contribute to good thinking and emotions can bias thinking. So emotional reasoning is so important. We're always unconsciously emotionally reasoning. Joe Damasio taught us that if you lesion the areas of the brain involved in emotion generation and emotion interpretation, in other words, the kind of so-called emotional brain and the prefrontal cortex, people really have a lot of trouble making any decisions at all, whether they be very technical in orientation or very emotional in orientation. And so, I think the more fast-paced the environment is, or the more high stakes it is, the more chance emotion has to get in the way. And so I think that's, if anything, the business case for stepping off and out of autopilot or trying to take emotions out of the equation and deliberately saying, what are the emotions? What's the data in them? Could they be biasing this decision or could they be contributing effectively to it?
Great.
Great.
Boom, boom. I hope that answers the question, Angelo.
I think it did.
Yeah, I think it's a highly important skill.
Corrine says, can you please provide data points on how EI creates value in a private equity-backed environment?
Wow. Unfortunately, Corinne, of all the private equity-backed environments I've looked in, often they're very devoid of emotion and too often have growth and numbers driving decision-making in ways that get in the way of ultimately the long-term gain is the first thing I'd say. But in any private equity play, particularly in mergers and acquisitions, often you have, after that event, highly emotive people. Am I going to keep my job? How long will I be around? How hard are they going to drive us? Kind of the list goes on. And so I think, private equity organizations really spend a lot, private equity plays, they spend so much time doing due diligence over a business. They're getting better at also doing due diligence over things like the culture of the business, how employees feel about it, and so on. Where they really, I think, have room to grow then is in the management of the asset they buy. Really making sure that engagement surveys are done, that they're reported directly to the board, not to the CEO and the HR director, because they're in conflict around those sorts of things. But that they really, fully get and understand how pleasant emotions ultimately drive better productive behavior. One of the most robust findings in the social sciences is pleasant emotions like feeling valued, cared for, consulted, informed, understood, feeling like you're doing meaningful work. That leads to discretionary effort. That leads to customer loyalty and profitability. That leads to better employee retention and talent attraction. And so, if you're buying a business out there or in a private equity environment, these are the things that should be top of mind for private equity investors.
Great. Owen asks, how do neuropsychology and neuroscience research influence current EI applications?
I think what we're seeing is the better understanding of discrete emotions from the neuroscience, so where emotions show up in the brain, the centers that are involved in them, and so on. Neuroscience is also confirming things like the broaden and build and narrow and limit hypothesis around pleasant and unpleasant emotions. Neuroscience has also, I think, help inform us of the difference between a mood, an emotion, and a feeling. And so I think that those are the ways in which neuroscience really speaks to us. I think the other thing that neuroscience has done to draw on the framework of people like David Rock is it's generally teaching us and the market the sorts of things that people commonly feel pleasant about, clarity, autonomy, relationships, purpose, and telling us also about the sorts of things that commonly create unpleasant emotions, like a lack of clarity, like being micromanaged. All that sort of insight is coming from neuroscience and social neuroscience studies.
Great.
Okay, let's take one more question there, and then we'll wrap it up.
Great. So we'll go to Kelly. She said, you mentioned earlier about the self-assessment of EI. If you were even able to better your own EI, does this mean that you believe it's possible that one could overcome poor EI?
I think you can overcome poor EI with just a self-assessment, yes, but I think it's more difficult because EI is something that obviously suffers quite poorly from the Dunning-Kruger effect. D-U-N-N-I-N-G, Dunning-Kruger, look that up, everyone. That is to say very simply that most of us significantly overestimate how well we demonstrate emotional intelligence. If you were to take 100 people randomly off the street and privately and confidentially whisper in their ear, how emotionally intelligent do you think you are and how well do you think you'd perform at an emotional intelligence test? David Dunning's research has shown that most people will say just above average. And of course, emotional intelligence is fairly normally distributed in the population. So it's much more difficult just with the self-assessment instrument. Absolutely. We're going to move from self-assessments to self-selecting behaviors for development. We think that's a more fruitful thing to do in the future, particularly in a development context. And so rather than get people to self-assess, we'll just get people to look at the behaviors, choose a behavior for the week that they want to demonstrate more effectively and help them through habit formation technology demonstrate that behavior more effectively. And I think that that's going to unleash a self-paced approach to EI development that may be effective. Better still is where you can sit down there with a trusted colleague, sit down at the computer with your partner, if you're crazy brave, sit down at the computer with a friend and, have someone helping you choose those behaviors in a sort of prioritized way. I think that would lead to even better outcomes. I think still one of the most reliable insights into how we show up from an EI perspective, obviously, is those that we interact with every day.
Yeah.
Right.
And on that note, let me just say that for anybody who hasn't had the opportunity to look closely at the way that Genos measure EI, Elaine is going to pop in our eu@genosinternational.com email address. And if you want to try an assessment for yourself, Ben is gifting that to you for being on the session here this morning. So if you want to see how do other people see you show up and see exactly what he's talking about in terms of that context, well then drop us a line on eu@genosinternational.com and we'll set you up so that instead of talking about it in theory, we'll give you an opportunity to give it a go. So Ben, we've come to the end of it. I'm going to just close things up. I hope you'll stay behind so we can formally thank you behind the scenes. But thank you in front of the scenes for really, really fascinating session. And I look forward. I hope I'm still around, but 20 years hence to talk about. So tell me, now that we're into the 6th decade of EI, what's going to be moving forward, and I think that's going to be fairly fascinating stuff then. So thanks a million, and I know it's eaten into your family time this evening, so really, really appreciate it. But it'd be great if you can stay behind just for a couple of minutes, just so we can say goodbye and thank you after we've closed down the session. So let me see. Here we go. So again, all thanks to Ben. Next week we have Gustavo Rossetti, and Gustavo is talking. Gustavo is very much the man on workplace culture and a very, very much a practitioner's practitioner, but a bot at the same time, great researcher. And he's just written an excellent book recently on remote, not distant, how to create remote working environments and hybrid working environments that are not distant. And nice guy, really clever bloke. He's going to be here next week talking on that topic. So again, I just remind you, as we come towards the end of the year, if you want to be going into 2023 with a new credential, there's a really great opportunity. We start on December 7th. You're finished by the 3rd week of January and could be fully certified, brand new credential for 2023. And again, Elaine has already popped the email address in there. There is also the QR code so you can get details on the program. But once again, I'm going to thank Ben and really, really appreciate it. And thank you particularly to you folks for being here week after week. We really do appreciate it. And we will see you this time next week. Well, not this time next week, but this day next week, please God. Take care. Bye-bye.